American University in Bulgaria.
Okay, good evening and welcome here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Robert White. I'm the chair of the business department. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Professor Boeva, who is Professor of International Economic Relations and Business Department at the University of International and World Economic Studies in Sofia. She holds a postdoctoral degree in international business and a master's in law. She teaches courses in international management and corporate governance at master's degree level in Bulgaria and abroad. She has served on the board of directors of several Bulgarian corporations. She was commissioner at the Bulgarian National Securities and Stock Exchange Commission. She is among the founders of Bulgarian National Corporate Governance Commission. She is a member of the Private Sector Advisory Group. In her capacity as a member of this group, she works on projects in ECA countries. Between 2008 and 2011, she was appointed a member of the European Forum for Corporate Governance, set by European Commission. Her publications are on corporate governance issues, international management, and public-private partnerships. It's my pleasure to hand the floor to her.
Thank you very much, Professor White. And thank you very much for the invitation to come here and to share my views about the corporate governance and the corporate governance in this part of the world. Of course,
Can we just see whether your mic's working?
I think that we tried it. Okay.
Now it's working.
Now it's working. Okay, I'll repeat. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very glad that it is to be here among you and to share my views about, and of course, theoretical and practical views about corporate governance in this part of the world. Not only theory, but practice. The topic is Bulgarian corporate governance and its European dimensions, Bulgarian case. Of course, I try to touch issues about how we do understand corporate governance in my country, and also I try to see our Bulgarian practice within European Union. And at the end of the day, at the end of my presentation, I try to touch something about Bulgarian case. And at the very end of my stay here, I'll try to explain you why this hall donated by Mr. Dalchev is so close to Bulgarian case of corporate governance. But it will be at the end. So provided you decided to learn about this, you have to stay the whole my lecture. So I was told that I have to have a lecture and not slides and presentations, so that's why I'll try to comply with my preliminary preparation for this evening. And I was told that I have to talk about 35 minutes, and later on I'll be very happy to answer questions. So let me start with the first question. Why is corporate governance important for our companies, for society as general? Of course, my argument is that its systems of principles and tools, corporate governance could add value to shareholders' wealth, good business standards, and national competitiveness. In my country, we are trying to understand what is corporate governance. Of course, we usually refer to different views about the origin of corporate governance. And here I'd like to point out that all over the world and in Bulgaria, academic community agrees on the point that separation of ownership from the control within corporation have driven the establishment of the system of corporate governance. Due to the separation, control over property rights was lost by the shareholders, and gradually the owners laid down the foundations of the system of corporate governance. At the very beginning, fiduciary duties of directors, board members, such as a duty of care and duty of loyalty, were the synonyms of good corporate governance. Through the years, corporate governance evolved, and now it's a system of principles, tools that direct publicly traded or listed companies. Excuse me, I didn't switch off my telephone. Later on, I'll especially focus on the fiduciary duties. For instance, in Bulgaria, it was quite a new concept. It is not Bulgarian concept. It is a cultural borrowing from Anglo-Saxon legal system. So when in year 2002 and 3 we start to discuss these issues, it was quite different from the practice we had at that time. So that's why here I'd like to point out that fiduciary duties is something, now it's in our law, now it's known what is it, but let's say 10 years ago, it's something quite new for our business community. What about the definitions and understanding of the corporate governance we have here, and how we associated corporate governance with developments in this country? Of course, we, at the very beginning, start to implement the principles of corporate governance because of the privatization and, of course, because of the establishment of the capital market. And at the very beginning, it was very difficult, but we understood that improper corporate governance, badly functioning boards, led to the collapses of some institutions in other countries. For instance, I'm not quite sure, are you familiar? I see very young people here. The collapse of Bank of Credit and Commerce International, it was an interesting case 20 years ago. And also, in 90s, it was Asian crisis, and later on we have the collapse of Enron. So the lessons learned for our economy, for our academia, for our business was that we need the corporate governance in order to have good companies and, of course, to have normal, well-developed, although it is very small, capital market. And here I'd like to point out that for us also is very important that corporate governance is among the 12 key standards for sound financial systems. And in Bulgaria, the penetration of corporate governance is due to the OECD principles and the publication of OECD principles of corporate governance in 1999 and year 2004. For us, it was very important to accept these globally applicable principles, practically principles which embedded the world wisdom, the wisdom of high-level experts. I especially underlined wisdom and high-level experts because for me, and I refer later on, corporate governance is not only law, legal system, but it's more about the mentality, about the understanding of the business people, of the business community. Today, when we are looking for definitions and understanding about corporate governance, it is noteworthy to refer that in Bulgaria, we refer to OECD explanation, and we accept that corporate governance is a set of relationships between the company's management, its boards, its shareholders, and other stakeholders. For us, is corporate governance, again, I'm referring to this definition, corporate governance also provides the structure through which the objectives of the company are set and the means of these or those objectives and monitoring performance are determined. In Bulgarian National Corporate Governance Court, which was launched in October year 2007, At the very beginning, we tried to explain what is our understanding. We, I mean the working group, the people who work on our national code, and we decided that we have to stick to something which is known, which works well. So that's why in our national code, corporate governance code, you will see the same definition, which is definition about corporate governance published in OECD principles. So to a certain degree, as I pointed out, Bulgarian listed companies implement this understanding about corporate governance. Of course, sometimes it's very difficult to explain to the business community what's corporate governance. This is a little bit difficult explanation sometimes for the business people, for the boards of directors, for the managers. That's why you see I'll offer you some different explanations, like Schleifer-Revishny. Corporate governance deals with the ways in which suppliers of finance to cooperation assure themselves of getting a return on their investment. I especially focus here on this definition because Schleifer-Revishny, including ex-financial minister of Republic of Bulgaria, Simeon Dyankov, among the experts who research extensively and publish extensively on corporate governance in new European, in new market economies in Europe like Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. So to a certain degree, these experts, as their publications, part of their publications are associated with the developments in the ex-socialist countries. And at the end, I would like to share with you my favorite definition and my favorite understanding what corporate governance is about. A chair lady of American Foundation many years ago, when tried to explain to the public what is it, she said, it is about the care for the ownership. It is about the care of the ownership. And I think that this very, very brief definition codes of the most essential features of corporate governance. When we talk about the corporate governance in this part of the world, in Bulgaria, usually we are sticking to the main principles and component of corporate governance as follows. Protection of shareholders' rights. For us, it's very important because it's about trust towards the capital market. It's about trust towards the market economy. It is about equal treatment of minorities and foreign shareholders. I here totally accept the OECD principle about the equal treatment of foreign shareholders because in the late 90s, in the very beginning of 21st century, when we tried to attract foreign investors, some local investors tried to neglect them. I'm talking about portfolio investors. So that's why for us it's very important to focus and to have not only equal treatment of minority, but also foreign shareholders. Also, another principle to which we stick to is consideration of interests of the stakeholders. I'm not quite sure, but maybe you're familiar that in our country, in this part of the world, we have a national program for corporate social responsibility. And when you try to open the websites of Bulgarian companies, and I'm talking about the publicly listed companies, you'll see on their website how they are engaged, how they're committed to the corporate social responsibility. So it is not just talking about interests of stakeholders, but we have quite good achievements in terms of corporate social responsibility. Excuse me. And of course, another principles, corporate governance principles to which we stick also, it's the disclosure of publicly required information, legal required information. And of course, one of the issues we have, and maybe at the end, when you have some questions, I try to share, it is about efficient and well-functioning boards. Still, we have some problems with efficiency of our corporate boards. All over the world, and I mean the European Union, the focusing was on the capable boards, independent directors, and of course, smooth rotation of board members. Independent director or independent directors is also something new for us. It was first legislated 10 years ago in our law for law securities, public offering of securities, and it was very difficult at the very beginning to explain why we need independent directors. We referred to the definitions which were applicable at that time in US, in UK, and of course we are very strict when we put this in our law, but it was very difficult to implement this and to have real independent directors. Still we have, according to law requires 1/3 of the board members to be independent. But still it is an issue which in my country we have to improve, I mean to tackle. Another issue of not in Bulgaria but all over the world for the good corporate governance is ethical behavior and integrity of board members. And also here I would like to say a few words about some developments in European Union, but prior going to this developments, I would like also to share with you some of the theories which we try to use when we explain the issues of corporate governance. Maybe, and I'm sure that in your studies you have heard about the agency theory, about the agent and principal relationship. It is one of the it is the theory which is well known over the world, and here in this part of the world we try to explain some of the problems referring to this theory. And of course the theory is driven by the problems that are most often reported, problems about the conflict or conflicts between the owners and the managers, conflict between the majority and minority shareholders, the unethical behavior of board members. Maybe I'll say something quite old and new for you, old for you, that this agency theory was launched by two American academia people, Jensen and Meckling, in the second half of 70s. They tried to explain through this theory the conflict I just mentioned and referred to. Of course, as I said, when I tried to explain new developments in Europe, European Union, I prefer to shed light on the theories, as I mentioned, agency theory, and now I try to shed light with another theory which is, I wouldn't say so popular, but it is very useful to understand these new developments in European Union. We know very well that theoretical models sometimes a very elegant way by offering knowledge and ideas. Some of the models are welcome, others are subject to criticism. But as I said a few minutes ago, I intentionally tried to share my knowledge about the stewardship theory. Stewardship theory. I see the reaction of my colleagues here, and I'm very glad that we are on one and the same page. But you see, stewardship and stewardship theory is a little bit difficult to be accepted because we, in this part of the world, we do not have the traditional steward as they have in UK. So that's why I like to say that the stewardship theory is a theory according to which managers, left on their own, act as responsible stewards of the assets they control. So the steward, according to this theory, is an alternative of the agent, but the steward and the stewardship theory, as I said, are made in UK product. So it was noteworthy to point out, both to you, maybe you're familiar, I do not know, that the steward was tasked with a number of responsibilities for the entire household. And also, it was some authors focused on the loyalty and long-term service of the steward. I especially am repeating the word long-term service. These are the main arguments offered by the proponents of stewardship theory of maybe a few years ago. And it was the global financial crisis and the search for new remedies that led to the remake of a stewardship concept. In UK, a stewardship code was launched. It was a few years ago. Institutional investors now have to comply with increasing norms of disclosure and responsible behavior in the governance of investee companies. Gradually, the concept crossed the channel, and a few days ago, I had a letter from the Dutch Commission for Corporate Governance, and in their report and letter, it was reported that in the Netherlands, a stewardship code was in operation. In other words, here I would like to point out that this theory about the stewardship was very helpful for the people after the crisis to find a way to tackle with the short-termism, which is and was typical for the behavior of many institutional investors. Provided you have more interest on the issue of the stewardship code and how this idea came to the public, provided you have time, go to some websites and read a very interesting report prepared by the Commission or Task Group of Sir David Walker. And Sir David Walker is a prominent UK banker and very well known in UK and European Union. And he got a task from Gordon Brown. It was at that time when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister of UK, to find out some new remedies for their problems they had with the financial institutions and intermediaries and institutional investors. And now I'd like to go to the second part of my presentation about corporate governance and European dimensions. In European Union, I prefer to stick to European Union, there are two trends in the area of corporate governance. On one hand, it is a trend that is determined by the national economic, social, and political, and now that cultural traditions. And on the other, it is the trend that is determined by our legal framework, directives, regulations, recommendations. Or the second trend we can name the convergence trend. What about the national models? And here I also refer to Bulgaria, a very interesting country. We have different models within European Union. Of course, we have the Anglo-Saxon system. It is the UK, where you have dispersed type of ownership, huge importance of capital market. You're familiar, it is both for the national and the global economy. And also, in UK, an Anglo-Saxon model, you have one-tier governance systems, or you have only board of directors. The UK is among the trendsetters of good corporate governance with EU and Commonwealth countries. We had this talk with Professor White a few prior the lecture. In some member countries, capital markets matters, but the banks are still the main source of financing. And in these countries, you'll have concentrated type of ownership. Usually, it is typical for the two-tier system, which is component of the continental model of corporate governance. Usually, the power is distributed by the owners' annual general meeting, directors, their representatives, at the supervisory board. It is one tier, and the second tier is the managers and manager board. It's typical for Germany, Austria, Netherlands, and more of the Nordic countries. I'm talking about Finland, Denmark, Sweden as well. And it's interesting to point out, because it's one of the unique situations in Europe. In Germany, the law stipulates the inclusion of company employees in the supervisory board. The phenomenon is referred to co-determination. Bulgaria and France are the two countries in which, according to the national jurisdiction, you have the coexistence of two systems. So provided you look through the website or through the information of Bulgarian Stock Exchange, you'll see that we have listed companies, one tier, only board of directors, and also you have two-tier corporate supervisory boards and also management boards. So that's why it's typical for Bulgaria and for France. Talking about the European Union trends and national specifics, I would like to point out that ex-socialist states are not isolated from the process of establishing the contemporary standard of corporate governance. It was the transition from the state-owned and planned economy towards a market economy that led to this type of legislation, and self-regulation. Privatization, here I mean voucher privatization on one hand, and privatization via mergers and acquisitions on the other, laid the foundation for the integration of principles of corporate governance in these new market economies. Practically, the enlargement of EU has accelerated the acceptance of corporate governance in Central and Eastern Europe. The process of implementation of the norms of corporate governance, legislation, and courts is successful. But on the other side, we still have problems, and I'm talking about my country. We have problems with the human factor, members of boards and management. Still, they know what is corporate governance, they try to comply with the law, but still they do not implement it totally the good corporate governance standards, which are not always legislated. And that's why I would like to point out all habits die hard. It's corporate governance, it's not only about the law and codes, but it is also about, as I said, about mentality. A few words about the corporate governance when we talk about this second trend, convergence trend. I'm sure that you're familiar with EU and you know about the freedom of capital, freedom of goods, the principles which were laid down in the Rome Treaty. But I'm sure that, and I know that it is typical for my Bulgarian colleagues, I'm talking for the business people, we do not associate these fundamental principles of European Union with the corporate governance. And I would like to point out that practically the development of corporate governance in the European Union is one of the instruments through which the basic principle of Rome Treaty and later on Treaty of Maastricht, Nice, etc. I'll stop here. The corporate governance is very instrumental for the implementation of these fundamental principles and also for the development of single market. These unified standards, for instance, for disclosure and the protection of shareholder rights, unified for all European member countries, led to dismantling of barriers to guarantee free movement of the capital. I wouldn't like to bother you because I have a few minutes more. I wouldn't like to bother you, but I just would like to mention that Euro directives, regulation, recommendations, and their respective transposing in the national legislation, practically some of these directives reshape the existing components of national corporate governance structure or add new ones. For example, we have a transparency directive that establishes obligation for all listed companies to improve the quality of information available to investors on the company's performance, financial positions, and also when there are changes in major shareholders. Another directive, which is known as the Directive for the Shareholder Rights, focuses on the improvement on the cross-border voting practices. It is very important to mention this directive because it is another example for the efforts of European politicians, business people, public officials to dismantle barriers and to permit free movement of capital. Under the provisions of these directives, minimum standards have been introduced to ensure that shareholders of the companies whose shares are traded on the regulated market have timely access to relevant information and also have the means to vote from distance. So it is very important this to encourage cross-border trade and free movement of capital, to have the opportunity to vote from distance, not to pay money, travel money, to go and to attend a general meeting for a company, provided you're a German shareholder, you'd like to have shares in Bulgaria. It's not necessary to take a plane from Frankfurt, pay money, and to stay a few days in order to attend the shareholder meeting of Sofia, for instance. Now you can vote from the distance. It is not only EU directive, but it was transposed in our law, and now it is in our law. So the shareholders have the opportunity to vote in correspondence via telephone and internet. And here I'd like also just to give another example for this convergence trend. It is the European company. Today in Europe we have so-called Société Europa, which gives some companies, to the companies, opportunity to register in the national courts, but according to status quo of Société Europa, and also to benefit for some more flexible arrangements in the directives and regulations that establish this Société Europa. For instance, companies like Porsche, in May this year, in the very beginning of May, Porsche at the shareholder meeting declared and explained that they will be registered as Société Européenne, which gives the German companies more flexible regime in terms of participation of employees. And here I'd like to focus on another very important for me feature of European corporate governance. It is about the balance between regulation and self-regulation. Although I'm talking about European Union and Bulgaria as well, I would like to start this part of my presentation with the statement from Ira Milstein. Ira Milstein is an American lawyer, and he is among the icons in the of corporate governance, not only in USA, but also he was among of the people who prepared and launched OECD principles for corporate governance. And Ira Milstein is a lawyer. Ira Milstein says that corporate governance refers to blend of law, regulation, and voluntary private sector practice. Self-regulation and courts, I refer later on, are typical example for this voluntary attitude of the private sector towards the principles of corporate governance. In European Union, we're talking, and in Bulgaria, we're talking about the combination of legislation and soft law, corporate governance codes, which are built upon the essential recommendation for the management and supervision of the listed companies, and these standards are for the good and responsible governance. In Bulgaria, we launched our first national code for corporate governance in year 2007, and later on we make some amendments last year, 2012. Provided you are not familiar with our practice and our codes, go to the website of Bulgarian Stock Exchange and you can have in English information about the codes. Also, most of the Bulgarian, of the blue chips and the companies which are registered and which shares are traded on the premium segment of our stock exchange, they accept to implement our national code. So provided you open their websites in English, you can also find information about national codes. So that's why maybe I'm a little bit, my presentation about standards, recommendations sounds a little bit, it's very difficult, pure theoretical maybe for you, but provide you like to see what is it, a voluntary code and what is the essence of corporate governance codes, go to the website of the stock exchange and you can read it immediately. The global financial crisis renewed practically, I'm talking about European Union because I was 4 years member of European Forum for Corporate Governance, year 2008, year 2011. The global financial crisis renewed the discussions about the balance between legislation and the soft law, how much government and how much market, how much business. Practically, scandals in Europe led to the revision of the relationship, I'm talking of some companies, practically corporate scandals within Europe led to the revision of the relationship of regulation and self-regulation. So, and also to the revision of the principle comply or explain. I'm not quite sure I'm familiar. Comply, explain is not typical for US, but comply, explain is typical for European practice. Here I would like to say that in European directive from year 2006, it was legislated that listed companies in their annual report have to inform about their corporate governance practice and also to explain how do they comply with the voluntary accepted principles of corporate governance, and provided they deviate, they have to explain why, Any deviations have to be reported and explained. And during the crisis, when we discussed the problems of self-regulation, the problem is not about comply, but how to explain, how to deliver this explanation to the shareholders in order to assure them that you have done everything you have to do in order to comply with the legislation, with the code, but there are some problems and you try to share in an open, transparent way this to the shareholders. So when we talk about comply or explain, I know it's very difficult, and I'll refer to this in a few minutes to Bulgaria. When we talk about comply or explain, we have to say that it is a benefit for the companies because it provides companies with necessary flexibility to adapt corporate governance practice to their specific situation and to explain. This approach only works, and here I would like again to say that being from a country that has dismantled plant economy and started to rebuild for Bulgaria, I especially use the word rebuild because be advised, I see very young people here, but be advised that Bulgaria during 20s and especially 30s last century had good, well-functioning market economy. So that's why I use the word rebuild its market economy. So I also stuck to the position that comply or explain is not a formal reporting procedure. And it is about market democracy, and it is also about the awareness and ethical behavior of corporate boards. So this was talking not only in Bulgaria, but also in various ECA countries. Here I see some colleagues, maybe there are some of the countries where I have been and I have worked on some projects. For me, the optimum balance is prudent regulation and responsible self-regulation. Of course, there is no single answer, and with Bulgaria we have a very, very interesting case in year 2011. A huge listed company in the real sector reported in its annual report, they are filing their reports, I mean listed company Bulgaria with the Financial Securities Commission, and this company reported high level of compliance with the National Corporate Governance Court in its annual report, and it was officially published also on the website of the company. A few months later, late August, early September, both the company and one of its listed daughter companies reported financial problems. Of course, it was not a scandal which could be compared with the size of Parliament, Italy, or Enron US, but the scandal sheds light on the negative aspects of the formal implementation of comply or explain. So, and here I'm trying to finalize this part of my presentation, to say that comply or explain, it's not box-ticking exercise. It's about, as I said, ethical behavior, awareness, and market democracy. And here I'd like to give another example about this regulation and self-regulation. The example is about the binding female quota. I do not know how you're familiar. There are a lot of ladies here, I see. I do not know how much you're familiar with the efforts, especially after the crisis, to find new remedies for the good, for the better corporate governance, for the better corporate boards. And there are a lot of discussions, and of course the lessons learned, as we say, were about diversity boards. In some countries, they said not only diversity, but more women on the boards. And it was the former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, that managed to pass a legal binding norm for women quotas at the very beginning. 20% for the board members has to be female, and later on, till year 2014, 40%. So here I would like to say that in the last couple of months, it's not only last couple of months, but maybe in the last year, the Commissioner Reding, she's the Vice President of European Commission, she visited Bulgaria a few months ago. Commissioner Reding led a campaign for more women, and she offered a draft directive about the binding quota of women in corporate boards. Her point is that we have to use laws in order to fix this quota for women. On the contrary, you have many countries, including in my country and Germany, I'm talking about what I have read, the reaction of the business community, academia, and politician exemplified the watershed moment of self-regulation and regulation, because in many countries, they accept that they have to have diversified board, more women, but on the voluntary principle, not legislated by the law. And here, unfortunately, I'm very limited in time. I'd like to say that the best example about this about self-regulation and business attitude towards female quota at the boards, there is a cartoon in Financial Times that echoed the debate on the binding quotas. The cartoon was about the pink lady who was offering her services to be elected as a board member. Very funny. Provided you're interested, I'll inform you about the number of Financial Times. I think it was the summer. And excellent example, not presentation like mine. And what about the future developments? I think that I'm talking about 50 minutes. Talking about the future developments, which are very important for my country, I'd like to point out that future developments in the area of corporate governance are associated with the action plan, which was launched last year on the December 12th, year 2012. What is the purpose of this action plan? First of all, it is response to the problems of the crisis. Second, the plan is trying to work to be part of the strategy Europe 2020, and the focus especially in the plan is about improving the disclosure, improving the shareholder rights and shareholder engagement, and also the focus is on the more transparency on remuneration policy and the individual remuneration of directors, as well about the shareholders' right to vote on remuneration policy and remuneration report. Briefly said, it is about say on pay. The plan as well now in some countries, it was legislated, says that the shareholders has to vote not only on the remuneration of the corporate board's members, but also to the remuneration of the managers, because in some companies, the managers got so huge salaries that do not correspond to their work and to the result, to their achievements. And in Switzerland, there was a very interesting referendum in March this year, and they managed, Switzerland is not in EU, but they managed, the referendum says, yes, the shareholders are responsible not only for the remuneration of the board members, but also about the remuneration of their managers. So this is about the action plan. And at the end, I would like to say that action plan aimed to the further development to the capital market, and last but not least, to the company's competitiveness and to the national competitiveness. Be aware that every year in the annual report of World Economic Forum, there are 2 or 3 components which shed light on the level of competitiveness, on the corporate governance, and the relation between corporate governance and national competitiveness. What about Bulgaria? We have excellent laws, we have national courts, and I'm very glad that in Bulgaria we moved from the stage when corporate governance was in the domain of academia, NGOs, some politicians, business people. Today in Bulgaria, we have listed companies which comply not only the law, but they declare that they comply with the National Code of Corporate Governance, and there is awareness that corporate governance is something that is not only about the company, but it is also about the society. Of course, I'm now leaving floor to you, and I'll be very glad to answer questions provided you have about Bulgaria. Mr. Dimitrov told me that I have to stick 40 minutes, no more, but it is more than 40 minutes. It's close to 50 minutes, and I would like to excuse. So my point is, corporate governance is something which is better to practice. Corporate governance is useful not only for the big companies, but the small companies as well. And it is part of the mechanics which brings value to the companies and to the country. I'll leave here a small book, and it is a book about Bulgarian companies and competitiveness. It is a book which is an extract from a project which we ran at my university more than 2 years. Thank you very, very much for your presentation. For your attention, excuse me. I'm not used to read lectures, but I prefer to talk and to discuss issues, but also, in order to manage the time, I have to stick to my preliminary prepared presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Excuse me.
You mentioned it earlier in your presentation that the adoption of corporate governance codes in Bulgaria was held back somewhat by old habits. So, could you give a bit more detail about that, Liz?
Yes, I try to. Let me give an example. Many years here, a little bit prior code, many years here, we worked with the consultants, USAID, also British Know-how Fund, France also we have people, Germany as well. And when they tried to help us to promote a new framework for the capital market for the companies listed on our small exchange, they offered us various arguments how to explain to the business people why they need corporate governance, why they need transparency, public offerings. And they didn't trust us that it is a very difficult issue. And later on, when we had seminars, I forgot that I have silent. And later on, when we have meetings, seminars with the business people, and now international experts try to deliver them the message how important it is, a lot of critics and people at that time, some of these people were directors from ex-socialist and socialist enterprises. And for them, it's very difficult to understand what transparency means, what disclosure means, you see? Because you're moving from one stage to another. Because in your previous capacity, you have to deliver information, but also you have to be very careful what you're delivering to. Now, you have to open your company and you have to be transparent, like in a fishing boat, yeah? So it was very difficult for them, for international experts, to convince the people. So when we talk about the code, again, it was a small, and here I would like to point something which I didn't mention. We had a group of people, business people, Sofia Stock Exchange, knowledgeable people, knowledgeable people who tried to attract foreign investors. So that's why they initiated Bulgarian Stock Exchange, also NGO like Center for Economic Development, and some of us business people from academia and business to initiate this work, this task force for the corporate governance. Of course, when we launched the code, it was October 2000, very official, Sheraton. We have people from Germany, from World Bank, etc., you see. And what after all this official opening? And it took time for the companies to start to implement corporate governance codes. Now, what's the situation? We have about 300 listed companies. And we have, as I mentioned, in the rules for listing, at this premium segment, a special requirements for corporate governance code to be implemented. Concerning how we try step by step to I'm not saying we, but as people who are involved in this issue, how to change the mentality. We have some competitions. For about 6 or 7 years, we have an annual national competition for best corporate governance companies, and we are very proud that some of the blue chips in Bulgaria got this annual award for the best company with the best corporate governance for the year. Of course, as well, we have award for the companies with the worst corporate governance. So gradually, we manage to have the support from the business community, and also be advised that some of the companies, they themselves, trying to attract foreign investors, trying to be on one and the same page with the shareholders from abroad, they have to have corporate governance code. And we have, of course, we're a small country, we have 2 or 3 companies with double listing that are listed on the Stock Exchange of Bulgaria and, for instance, Stock Exchange of Warsaw, Polish Stock Exchange. So that's why it is not only the law, but it is media and step by step. And also, we have to mention, we are in the European Union, so we are part of this union, and we have to. Of course, what is a little bit different in Bulgaria, in countries like Germany or Netherlands, they have the support of the government. In Bulgaria, different governments have different attitude towards the corporate governance. So I'll be glad when Bulgarian governments will fully support the work in the area of corporate governance. So did I address your question? Okay, thank you.
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
Concentration on corporate governance. Do you think that there might be over-concentration on corporate governance and not enough on corporate social responsibility?
You see, for me, talking about corporate social responsibility, first I'd like to say that in my country, we are talking too much about the corporate social responsibility, and sometimes we're forgetting that it is about sustainability. You see, we have PR campaigns, we have nice exercises, we are going to the mountain, we have planted trees, and 2 years later, you see that's nothing. I'm speaking frankly. So, but it is very important that at least now we have this conscience about the corporate social responsibility. Of course, we didn't move, when I'm talking, because I'm working for a very small company now still, so I'm not only teaching at the university, but I'm working, and I know how difficult it is for the business. Of course, we are not at the stage of some big companies about the social responsible investment. We are not talking about the new competitive advantage, the third competitive advantage launched by Porter, etc., etc. But you see, although, for me the problem is sustainability, flexibility and sustainability. So flexus is my word, flexus. It's very important. That's it.
Can I ask a question? Who do you think the cultural leaders here should be? So you're talking about a fundamental shift, and in terms of culture and also in terms of the law. Who should be the leaders here? Should it come from the state, from the government? Should it come from academia? Should it come from the business?
You see, we academia, especially me, we try to have champions from the business. And that's why, as I said, for 6 or 7 years, we have this national competition with the media support, with the support from the business community, as well from the Financial Securities Commission. And that's why, because our philosophy is that not the academia, but the business people, because as I mentioned, at the very beginning, let's say, in late 90s, it was a kind of elite which was associated with corporate governance, academia, NGO people, so very nice, very fashionable, but that's not enough. We have to have business. And so that's why in our National Commission for Corporate Governance, it's a voluntary body, we are trying to support the development of corporate governance. We try to see how the court, we are not monitoring body, how the court is implemented on the annual basis. We are doing some estimations, evaluations. And in the commission, we have business people, we have business leaders. Why? Because we need business leaders to promote, to sell corporate governance, not academia people. We have at the Commission the CEO of Sofia, Mr. Donev, who also is a chairman of the Bulgarian Confederation of the Employers. We have people from another big, the CEO of one of the blue chips on the stock exchange. So that's why academia, where we can write books, articles, projects, we can interview them. I'm very glad that I had the chance to work for the business, for the companies, and to learn corporate governance, learning by doing, not doing. So I'm very glad that I got this experience.
What about in terms of business education within the university?
Tough problem, but here I think I'm using the word again on some page on my colleagues. A few years ago, I tried to meet a prominent American professor teaching corporate governance at Harvard Business School, Professor Roche. And one of the questions I asked him, how are you working with the business community? How they react to your offers to educate them? At the very beginning, he told me that, and he invited me to one of his courses at the master program, but he told me that it's not so easy to work with business people. What about Bulgaria? I'm very glad that my university, at one of our master programs, we have this course on corporate governance in international business. And also, I'm not only teaching, but also I try to attract visiting lecturers to share their experience, and it is very useful for my students. So education is one side of the story, but it is very difficult to teach the business people. They do not like lectures, etc. So, for instance, for many years we are trying to establish Institute of Directors in this part of the world. It's very difficult. In this book, I'll leave this small book to you. We got, through the interviews, very positive reactions towards establishing institute, but not like an education body, but as a place when you'll share knowledge. It is not UK system. In the United States, you have National Association of Corporate Directors, you have chapters. I attended some of their meetings, I got the chance. It's very difficult, it's very difficult. You see, it's very difficult, and I'm speaking frankly, some of my ex-students are CEOs, the blue chips. It's very nice, they're very, very smart, but they do not like to come and to be educated.
There are no more questions. I'll thank.
This program is brought to you by AUBGTalks. For more, please visit us at aubg.edu/talks.